Hey everyone, I'm Dallin, and I wanted to talk a bit about my master's degree in computer science that I just finished up. Honestly, it still feels a bit strange to talk about my master's degree in the past, but now I'm officially out of Chicago. I'm back home in Florida, and I'm actually packing my bags to move to Seattle for my new job in big tech. And as I said in the title, I ended up with my master's degree in computer science from the University of Chicago, even though I actually had no background in computer science before I started. I remember at the beginning of my master's degree, I could barely write a for loop in Python, and I'd never even heard of recursion. And so, actually, right off the bat, some of you may be wondering how a master's degree with no prior background is any different from just doing a bachelor's degree. And if you're just here for that answer, I recommend you skip to the end, although it does depend on some of the context that I lay out throughout this video. So, after I had finished undergrad, I remember this was several years ago now, I was pretty curious about computers. I remember that. So I bought a Raspberry Pi for something like 30 bucks and I threw it in my backpack before I went traveling. It was kind of just like, oh, here's a reason that I can learn Python while I'm traveling around. And at the time, I was actually leaning towards doing a coding boot camp. Um, I wasn't so sure about a degree in computer science, but it took me a couple months to figure out that a formal computer science degree was actually what I wanted. And so in the next few minutes, I'll talk a bit about how I decided to do a degree instead of a boot camp, how I landed at UChicago of all places, because there were lots of master's degrees in computer science out there, and then what it's like doing an advanced degree in a field that I had no background in. And then finally, I'll share some thoughts on what it's like to look back now in the past year and a half. So let's get started. First thing that I want to talk about is the boot camp versus master's degree decision. So for those of you who aren't so familiar, the idea of a coding bootcamp is kind of exactly what it sounds like. And you can take this with a grain of salt because I haven't actually done a coding bootcamp, but from what I understand, it's kind of like you go in knowing nothing, then you'll spend the next 12 weeks or so learning to code for something like 12 hours a day. It's pretty intense. And then by the end, you come out of it with an intro to a modern software stack and a portfolio of projects that you can show off in your job applications. And personally, I was looking at boot camps in JavaScript to learn how to be a web developer. But ultimately, there were three factors that swayed me toward a master's degree in computer science. First was kind of just curiosity. I remember at the time, computers were kind of like this magic box. I didn't know how they worked, didn't really know what they did either. But I wanted to learn how to build one. It seems cool. And I wanted to learn like what the internet was, how it worked, and what like making the internet actually entailed. The second reason I decided to go with a master's degree was because of some advice that I had heard, which was, I'll paraphrase, that writing code is easy, but if something doesn't work as expected, then fixing it is much harder. And to fix it, you need to understand what the computer is actually doing to understand what it's doing wrong. So that was the second reason. The third reason for studying computer science was one that I actually learned after I started the master's degree. I remember it was my second quarter of classes, and I was really caught off guard by how hard school was. I wasn't expecting it to be so challenging. And there were some words of wisdom that one of my professors shared at the time. I remember chatting with him after one of our classes. And what he told me was that in the job market, the key is specialization. And he asked me if I wanted to stand out with an advanced degree in computer science, which relatively few people have, or if I wanted to be lost in a crowd of thousands of people all looking for jobs after finishing coding boot camps. And by that point, I was kind of already in the thick of it. But speaking to him really made me feel more confident that the computer science degree was the right choice for me. Now I will take a step back and talk a bit about how I went looking for a master's degree program. And for me, the question was kind of simple. It was either to do OMSCS or not do OMSCS. I imagine many of you who are watching this video have already heard of OMSCS. It's Georgia Tech's online Masters of Science in Computer Science. The program is fully online. You don't need a formal CS degree to get in, although you kind of really do need some level of background. I'll talk more about that in a sec. And the whole program, the whole master's degree is only $7,000. So it seemed like a pretty sweet deal. And on the other hand, I was considering the master's program in computer science at UChicago. And what I liked about the UChicago program was that you could get into the program with no computer science background, But then before actually starting classes, you had to take and pass prerequisite or placement exams. And the placement exams made sure that you were sort of up to speed to be able to take master's level coursework. And then if you weren't, you could take prerequisite courses. And I thought that was a pretty appealing option. I didn't want to sort of jump in and not really know what I was getting myself into and end up in a class that was like way too hard for my level. So I applied to both programs and I ended up getting accepted to both. And I ended up picking the UChicago program for a few reasons. First was because of the prerequisite courses, actually. So with Georgia Tech, it seemed kind of like you jump right into the deep end. And then if it's too much, you either drop out or you fail. And neither of those seemed like really great options. And with UChicago, I got to take placement tests to verify that I actually knew enough to start master's courses in those topics. And in some topics, I did know enough. In other topics, I needed to take prereq courses. And I preferred that option because I knew, well, hey, at least I won't start off at too much of a disadvantage. I mean, in either case, some of my peers were going to be coming in with 4 years of computer science in their bachelor's degrees, plus some software development experience in their jobs. But I knew that if I took a prerequisite course from the same university, at least I wouldn't be going in blind. And the other reason that I chose UChicago was because I wanted to have connections with fellow students. I wanted to meet them in person. And I also wanted to get to know the professors. And so when I was considering OMSCS, I had joined their student Facebook group. And from reading the posts from current students, I realized a couple of things. First was that there were tons of students, lots of students. And they were writing posts about how it's impossible to get into the classes that you want to take since there are so many students. And that sort of made me think like, do I really want to take a master's degree program if I can't even take the courses that seem interesting? And another thing that they were writing about was that it was pretty hard to get to know your professors and get in touch with them because of the massive online course format. On the other hand, at UChicago, it seemed like peers were really accessible and professors too. I could get to know them personally. This was especially the case, of course, before the pandemic, but even in the remote world with smaller classes and professors who were dedicated to teaching that class, I thought it was a really great way to get to know people personally. And also at the time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep going in academia or not. I was thinking maybe I'd want to go on for a PhD, in which case letters of rec from professors would be really important. And so that's all the more reason to pick a program where I could get to know the professors. So now the question is, what was it like doing an advanced degree in a subject that I didn't have the background in? And to be honest, there were times where it was really awkward. In some of my classes, I would meet undergrads who knew way more about computers than I did, even though I was going for a master's degree and they were doing a bachelor's. And even in some cases, I would be tutored by undergrads or they would be my TAs in classes. So I thought that was kind of like an awkward situation. People were really nice, but it sort of just felt weird to be like, oh yeah, I'm getting the advanced degree, but you clearly know more about this than I do. And another thing that I felt was, I felt a lot like an imposter, especially taking classes. I would be sitting next to PhD students. These were people working with some of the top computer scientists in the world in our department. They would be doing cutting edge research in computer science, and I would be there still trying to grasp the basics. And I would feel like I was kind of the only one in the class struggling to keep up, even if it was the first week when everybody else was sort of cruising, getting ready for the harder material. And then I would ask my peers and be like, hey, how's this going for you? And they would be like, oh, I thought it was hard when I first learned it in undergrad 5 years ago, but now it's pretty easy. And that sort of made me feel like if I were to ask questions, I would really be slowing the class down. But for me, it took me a bit of time to realize that there were other students in the class with the same background as me, the same background, not necessarily the same like undergrad degree, but that they didn't all come from a CS background. So I got to know some of them. And it was really great because we had actually met each other in the prerequisite classes. So we knew that we were coming from the same background. And then we would form study groups. And that was really helpful in the very least to not feel like I would be slowing down class when I was asking questions that sort of seemed like remedial. Now, a year and a half later, what's it like to think back on my master's in computer science? And honestly, it's kind of crazy to think that just a year and a half ago, I barely knew what a computer was, let alone how to use one, how to build one. And in such a short time, I really learned a lot. I took classes in really cool topics like compilers and operating systems and cryptography. And I learned how the internet was designed and what emergent technologies look like in the human-computer interaction space. And one question that I've actually been asked quite a bit is if my master's degree in computer science really warrants being called a master's degree, even though I did it in less than 2 years, whereas people who do bachelor's degrees can be taking computer science classes for as many as 4 years. And my answer to that is really, it depends. So I ended up taking 14 classes. Most of them were at the master's level, and towards the end, I also took some at the PhD level, even though technically only 9 classes were required for the degree. And for reference, I have some friends who did their computer science bachelor's degree in just 8 classes. And in fact, some who did it only taking 6 or so computer science classes. And to compare myself to some of them, well, some of them I know way more about computer science fundamentals, but compared to others, I'm really just a beginner. So it's really tough, honestly, to compare yourself to others in this field because lots of people like to hack on side projects or people have industry experience, especially going into the master's degree program. There would be some peers who were coming straight from bachelor's degrees, others who had done a bachelor's degree and then worked as software engineers for 5 years, and now we're doing their master's degree. But I think regardless of how I sort of stood compared to my peers, I think what I gained most from the computer science degree is just to have enough foundational knowledge to be able to solve problems and get myself unstuck when I'm writing software instead of sort of just flailing my arms and giving up. And I think with that, I'll wrap up this video. In my next one, I'm planning to talk about how this computer science degree prepared me for a software engineering job in big tech and what things I needed to learn outside of my degree to make sure that I was prepared for these hard interviews. So I hope this video was useful or at least mildly entertaining, but in either case, please like and subscribe and let me know in the comments what other videos I should make. Thanks for watching.